So I said already, I want to talk about emotional freedom. Last week we talked about finding freedom from the perspective of we all need hope. Sometimes our world is a hard place to have hope, but how Jesus Christ and his life, death, and resurrection, and in particular his presence with us in this world through our trials and tribulations, how that gives us a hope that we don't have on our own. And what I want to emphasize this morning in talking about finding emotional freedom in particular is that God cares about our emotional health. I want you to understand that. God cares about your physical health, your emotional health, your psychological health, your spiritual health. God cares about us as total people. It's not, some people think, oh, it's just about the spirit and the soul. No, it's about the whole person. And God cares about that, and he cares about it to such an extent that when you struggle in that area, when you feel like you're at the end of your rope, that if one more thing comes down upon you, it's all going to explode. When you feel like that, you need to know one thing, and I'm going to emphasize this over and over again in the sermon. You're going to be sick of hearing it by the time I'm done. God cares about that. And not only does he care about it, but he will walk with you through the problem to healing. And I want you to hear that really clearly. He cares about it. He is with you or with someone that you love, because sometimes it's not our own issue. Sometimes it's someone that we care about that we see going through it. He will walk with you through the ups and downs to healing and even beyond. The importance of this was emphasized to me not too long ago. I was talking with a friend of mine. She's a pastor, and she was telling me that she had just gone through a period of depression where she said, I literally couldn't even go and be part of my congregation for a couple of months. She had to take a break. Now, she's part of a clergy couple, and so and she and her husband share the preaching responsibilities and stuff, and she's fortunate that her taking a break didn't mean that there was no one in the church at all. They didn't have to get a supply preacher or anything because her husband was there, but it was a really hard time, and she was telling me how it happened. And she said that she'd been struggling with burnout, and that's very different from depression, but she'd been struggling with burnout. And so one of the things that she was counseled to do as part of the struggle with burnout is a counselor said, you and your husband need to take a vacation. You just need to get away for a week and just relax and let your body and your spirit and your emotions just kind of rejuvenate. And so they went on vacation. And she said that actually it helped. Like, she came back and she didn't feel so burned out, and she felt a new sense of energy. And she said she went to church that Sunday, and this was before she had to stop going to church for a little while. And she said she went to church, and one of the folks at church, one of the trusted, most loved, most spiritual people at church, pulled her aside and said that, and kind of scolded her. And said, why did you take vacation at the same time? We've hired both of you. We should never have to have a supply preacher. Can you imagine? And she said all of a sudden the burnout was back, and it just went straight into depression. And then she had to take a 2-month break, which probably irritated this person even more. But here's, and this happens, it may surprise you, but actually clergy is one of the professions that has the highest rates of depression. But the truth of the matter is we all face stuff like this, because there's always somebody, no matter what your job is, no matter what your job is not, no matter your stage in life, where you're at, there's always somebody that will pull you aside, because they always do it in private, right? That's how Satan works. They do it in private, and will say something, oftentimes not even aware of the other things that are going on in your life, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, but will say something that will just pull and suck the air right out of you. Have you ever had that happen? Somebody will do it. You ever feel like that? You know, or maybe it's not even somebody says something. Maybe it's somebody does something. And do you ever feel like you're just right at the edge, and like if there's just one more thing, you're going to lose it? You know what I'm talking about, right? I'm not the only one that sometimes feels that way. You know, like you're one paycheck away. You're one nasty comment away. You're one more disappointment away from just like, I can't handle it anymore. Take me now, Lord. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, good. It might help you to know that some of God's most faithful servants have often felt this way. And I want to show you an example of one this morning. The prophet Elijah. We're going to look at 1 Kings chapter 19. And so if you have a Bible, you can open it to 1 Kings chapter 19. If you're using the church Bibles, The page number is 285, if my eyes aren't deceiving me. And my eyes could be deceiving me because I have a harder and harder time reading small print. This is a story about a man named Elijah. He's a prophet of God. And at one level, Elijah was, he's the person that you would envy. Like everything's going well, and he's a prophet of God. He's like the right-hand man of King Ahab. That means he's eating the royal food. He's drinking the royal wine. He's going to the best parties. If he was on Instagram, he's one of those people you'd look at and you'd be like, wow, I wish my life was like that. Everything looks good. But there's another aspect where life is stressful, right? I mean, you're the advisor to the king, that's cool, right? But you're also the advisor to the king. And Ahab was not the easiest king to be the advisor to because he flip-flopped a lot. You didn't know what he was going to do. If what he said on Monday is what he was going to do on Tuesday, he was all over the place. Supposedly he was kind of Jewish and in the Jewish camp, but he married a pagan, and there was all that kind of stuff going on. And so it's cool, like you've got this prestigious job, you're the prophet to the king, but you're also the prophet to the king who keeps messing up. And so he's got that challenge going on, and there's a lot of paganism in the time, partly because the queen is a Baal worshiper, which is an aspect of paganism, and so you're the prophet to the king, you're like the Jewish prophet, God's prophet, but then there are all these other prophets telling the king all kinds of other stuff, and so Elijah, finally, they have this big showdown, and there are hundreds of those other prophets, and there's one Elijah, right? And you may remember the story. They both build altars, and the idea is whoever's God sets the altar on fire, wins, and the Baal prophets, they dance around and do all kinds of crazy stuff, no fire. Elijah mocks them with all kinds of silly retorts and stuff like that. Then he, just to add emphasis and stuff, he throws water on his altar and then prays, and God, smotes it, right? And so he wins the big battle. So all that stress is over, right? And he's celebrating. And this has happened to you before, where like there was this big meeting or this big test or this big thing coming up, and you're all stressed about it, and finally you get to it and you do it and it goes well, and you're like so you got that feeling of relief and that giddiness, right? And then this is also a common thing that happens. So right after that happens, Elijah finds out that not everybody is so happy about the success. Not everybody is so enthusiastic. In fact, there's some grumblings. And the grumblings are coming from Queen Jezebel. That's Ahab's wife. And not only is she not excited about the Lord's victory, but she puts a contract out on his head. Kill this man. And so he's gone through this period of stress, and he's elated, and all of a sudden, poof, crash. And I want you to read what happens, the part we're going to read from 1 Kings chapter 19. It'll tell just a tiny bit of that story, but then it's going to, I want you to see how God walks with Elijah through where he's at. Because he gets so upset. He runs off, he flees, which is reasonable because someone's threatening to kill you, but he runs off, and then he throws a temper tantrum. And then in the end, he says, Lord, just kill me. Let me die, right? Kill me now, Lord. Take me. I can't take this anymore. So let me read. This is a long reading, but it's worth it, and it's a story, so try to follow along. 1 Kings chapter 19. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done, right? And maybe Ahab was celebrating it with Elijah, but Jezebel's taking it a different way. And how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So after Elijah won the battle, the Baal prophets all were killed. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. In other words, I'm going to kill you. Elijah was afraid. He ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. So he goes off in the desert And he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. Take me now, Lord. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. And then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." And he looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals. Fresh baked bread. Isn't that nice? And a jar of water. And he ate and he drank and he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and he ate and he drank. And strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went into a cave and spent the night. I was planning to read further, but I think I can stop there. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this, and I want you to notice, the first thing I want you to notice is actually what the angel doesn't say. So the angel, a representative of God, comes to him in his despair, right? He's just like, "Lord, I just want to die. I'm done. I can't handle this. I'm too stressed. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. Just let it end," right? And you've been there. Just make it stop. I don't care what has to happen. It's just got to stop, right? And God sends an angel. So God doesn't abandon him. But what's one of the interesting things to me is there's a spiritual aspect to this problem, right? I mean, this is a result of him standing up for God, standing against paganism, standing against Baal, standing up to Jezebel, who was worshiping Baal. There's a spiritual aspect to this problem. Isn't it interesting that the angel does not counsel him, at least not at the beginning, to pray? How many of us, when we're in a point of despair, and Naomi said as she was fighting her depression and as she was sharing with the church, people kept saying, "Just pray. If you just pray, it'll go away." How many of us have been given that advice? It's always good advice to pray, but it's important to realize that that's not where God started in this case. And I want to think about that for just a minute because it's interesting. It's not where God starts with Elijah. Instead, the angel told him what? Get up and eat. Here's some fresh bread. Here's some water. Get up and eat. It's like God is recognizing that there's a spiritual aspect to this, but until you're physically well, the spiritual part, we're gonna wait on that just a minute because you don't have the energy and the ability to focus and all that on prayer or anything spiritual until you've taken care of your need for nourishment. And so he says, get up and eat. Here's some bread. And there's actually deep emotional and psychological insight in there because there are a lot of people, and I find this weird, but there are a lot of people that when they're stressed, they don't eat, right? I'm continually told by people, when I was stressed and full of anxiety and depressed, I forgot to eat. And I'm like, I can't relate to that at all. When I'm stressed, I eat a ton, right? And I don't know where you fall. But people respond differently to that kind of stress. And not only that, but I don't eat like bread and water. Like I eat candy and chips and wash it down with soda, which I don't think this is what Scripture is recommending. But what he's saying is there's this need for physical nourishment and to take care of yourself physically. And so Elijah's stressed out, and the angel says, here is something to eat. You need to eat. Really good advice. And it's good to know that God cares about us at that level. Like some people think, as I said earlier, some people think God only cares about our spirit. No, God cares about every aspect of who we are, physically, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, spiritually, the whole thing. In fact, in Scripture, it's not separatable. And so the first thing is he says, eat. And then what's the second thing the angel does? What happens next? Elijah falls asleep. The angel doesn't wake him up, at least not for a while. Lets him sleep. Wakes up later, gives him more food, and then lets him sleep again. Says, you need some rest, right? I can get into a God like this who recommends naps. And I'm making a little bit of a joke about it, but it's serious as well. Like, God cares about this part of our lives. And then what does he do? He says, you need to rest because you have a long journey ahead. Do you know how people traveled at that time? They walked. And he goes to Mount Horeb, which is noted in the thing as the mountain of God. So what's happening is God saying, okay, you're stressed, you're at the end of your rope, you want to die, you may be slipping into depression. I want you to take care of yourself physically. You eat something, have a nap. Eat again, have another nap. And then you need to go. And I think there's exercise involved in this. Eat, sleep, and exercise. You need to go to Mount Horeb. It says it's a 40-day journey. That just means it was a long walk. You need to eat, sleep, and get some exercise. And where are you going to end up? Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, the sacred place. Go to church, go to a mountaintop where you feel close to God. Go to a prayer group, a Bible study, some sacred place. It could be the counselor's chair, or for some people, it may be the doctor's office, but that sacred place where you can go for healing. The point to me seems to be that when we're at the end of our ropes like that, one common problem, and it's not, maybe, everybody's a little bit different, and God, it's one of the cool things about Scripture is God treats everybody a little bit differently. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. It's not one size fits all. But for Elijah, and I think for many of us, when we get to the end of our ropes emotionally, a lot of times we stop taking care of ourselves. And we're all over you're rushing from here to there, and there's no time to think, and there's no, and you just, you stop sleeping well, and you stop eating well, and you stop walking, and you stop going to those sacred places, whether it be church every Sunday, or maybe it's the Bible study on Tuesday night or something, and they're all good, but you stop those kinds of things, and we just stop taking care of ourselves. And what this is telling us is that God cares about us at all those different levels. God cares about us at all those different levels. And I'm emphasizing that because sometimes you get Christians who will say, no, it's really only about the spirit. And you should neglect your body, and you should abuse your body, and you should just power through and pray it away. And, there is no such thing as burnout, and there's no such thing. Kind of like that church member was trying to say to my friend Naomi, you should never take a vacation with your husband. I mean, it seems crazy, but you've had bosses that treat you that way. It's not just pastors that suffer comments like that. You've had friends and relatives who, they never give you a minute to rest. Every minute they're on your case, right? So this is not something you can't relate to as well. We all have, and the thing that I think this gives us permission to do is recognize that no, these other things do matter. It's not just about spirit. It doesn't make you more spiritual to neglect those parts of your life. Prayer is never bad advice, but sometimes it's not the only thing we should do. Some people seem to think that Jesus lived, died, and rose again only for a spiritual resurrection, but we don't believe in a spiritual resurrection. We believe he physically came back to life. We believe in a bodily resurrection, right? It was physical, it was bodily. Friends, and what this means is that if you're struggling with stress and anxiety, even depression, God cares about that. And he cares about all aspects of it. The spiritual, the emotional, the physical, the chemical, right? Because I said sometimes your spiritual place might be going to the doctor and getting meds. There's no shame in that. God cares about that. He loves you. He loves all of you, the totality of what makes you you. You might need to relax with a good meal. You might need to take a nap. You might need to take a walk. You might need to go to a sacred place, a counselor, all that kind of stuff. We live in a world that shames us for needing to take care of ourselves, don't we? The other thing that we can see in this story of Elijah is not only does God care, but God will walk with you through it. God didn't leave Elijah alone. He sent an angel to provide the bread and the water, to provide the space for the nap, to provide the counsel for the walk and the telling him where to go and what to do. And Elijah was so frustrated and so scared he was ready to die. But God didn't want that. God walked with him through the depression, brought him back into the light, and then continued to use him in ways to transform the world and to bring people to himself. And the good news this morning is he can do that for you or for someone that you love. Don't give up. Don't think that, this part of my life God doesn't care about. I just need to focus on. No, God cares about everything in your life. And that's good news for people like you and me. Will you join with me in prayer?